In the first half of the last century, American political theory was obsessed with the expert. The key to effective government, it was thought, was to take the direction of government agencies out of the hands of politicians and to place it within the control of men experienced within the various fields of government regulation. Accordingly, despite the fact that the United States Constitution calls for all executive power to reside in a President of the United States, Congress created a series of agencies insulated from presidential direction and control, in that their managers were not subject to the President's orders and could not be removed from office by the President except for malfeasance. Typically, these so-called independent regulatory agencies were headed by a board of 5 or more individuals, no more than a majority of whom could be from the same political party, and they were appointed for terms of years that exceeded the 4-year presidential term. In this way, it was thought politics could be taken out of the job of managing the economy. It would be done by experts. Thus, there was created what came to be known as the headless fourth branch of American government, a series of alphabet agencies such as the ICC, the FTC, the SEC, the FCC, the CAB, and if you don't know what they are, it doesn't matter. It is fair to say that the project was a grand failure for 2 basic reasons. First, and most important, it was discovered, and this should have been no surprise, that many of the most important issues to be decided by government agencies, even agencies dealing with seemingly technical fields, such as telecommunications and transportation, had no right or wrong answers that experts can discover. They involve social preferences, which in a democracy can only be expressed through the political process. How many television stations should a single company be permitted to own? The FCC has to make that kind of a decision. Well, it depends on how much you care about the quality of programming. By and large, bigger operations can produce better programming, compared with how much you fear domination of television by big companies, including domination of news and public affairs. There's no right answer to the question, only a policy preference. How much should the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, permit railroads to charge for the hauling of municipal waste? If they are allowed to charge their cost, which is how rates are generally set, the expenses plus the reasonable profit, it will be very expensive to dispose of municipal waste by rail. After it costs the same amount to haul a carload of garbage as a carload of computer chips. But perhaps we want to subsidize the burying of municipal waste in landfills so that cities do not pollute the atmosphere by incineration. Well, we can achieve that goal by requiring railroads to charge below their cost for carrying municipal waste, the deficit to be made up for by permitting overcompensatory rates for other cargoes, which of course amounts to a tax on the consumers of those other cargoes. So, how much you permit railroads to charge depends upon, number one, how much you care about the environment, and number two, how much you're willing to subsidize municipalities. There's no right answer to the question, only a policy preference. And the second reason the project of the so-called independent agency was a failure is that it is quite utterly impossible to take politics out of policy decisions. That is not just a reality, it is, for those of us who believe in democracy, a blessed reality. What happened in the United States is that the reduction in the elected president's control over the independent regulatory agencies was simply replaced by augmentation of the Congress's control. Agency heads were no longer removable by the elected president, but they were also no longer protected by his power. He had no interest in protecting them, since their acts were not his, and their failures were not his failures. Thus, the independent regulatory agencies became all the more subservient to the policy direction of the committees of Congress responsible for their budget and for their oversight. And by the end of the 20th century, independent regulatory agencies were no longer fashionable. Indeed, two of the oldest, the Interstate Commerce Commission and the Civil Aeronautics Board, were abolished. But in the United States, and indeed throughout the world, belief in the expert has been replaced by belief in the judge moralist. Whereas technical questions, we have come to learn, do not have any single right answer, surely moral questions do. Whether a woman has a natural right to an abortion, whether society has the right to take a man's life for his crimes, whether it is unfair, and hence in the terminology of the American Constitution, a denial of equal protection to permit marriage between people of opposite sex but not between people of the same sex, whether a human being has an unalienable right to take his own life and to have the assistance of others in doing so. These and many similar questions involve basic morality, basic human rights, and surely there is a right and wrong answer to all of them. Well, I believe firmly that there is, which is to say, I believe in natural law. The problem is that my view of what natural law prescribes is quite different from others. And none of us has any means of demonstrating with anything approaching scientific certainty that his position is correct. Thus, as a matter of democratic theory, there is no more reason to take these issues away from the people than there is to take away issues of economic policy, because there is no moral expert to answer them. This is not to say that the people's answer to these moral questions always override my own conscience. Of course it does not. In Nazi Germany, for example, even if it had been democratically determined that Jews and Poles had no right to live, I would be obliged to protect and defend them in defiance of the law if necessary. But I'm speaking here not about individual responsibility. I'm speaking about who in a democratic society should have the power to determine the government's view, the law's view of what the natural law is. And that seems to me obvious. Given that there is a natural law, the question becomes, what do the American people or the British people or the Dutch people believe the natural law to be? Does it permit abortion or forbid abortion? And in an open democratic society, the people can debate these issues and seek to persuade one another to their point of view. And the people, unlike the courts, can even compromise on these issues. For example, by leaving the issue of abortion to be dealt with in divergent fashion by the subunits of a federal state.